company was never good.
Well, my ears are kind of stopped up today, so if you want me to hear you, you may have to speak up. But welcome once again to the Love Your Life Workshop. Here we go again. And you know, you guys know I'm into health and all that, right? So I found out a weird fact. Like, do you know what's red and bad for your teeth? A brick.
Is that it?
That's it.
That's it?
All right, well, good.
Holy
I
cow.
can deal with that. I'm not gonna. I was afraid you were
That took
gonna.
real
That's another
courage
one of
to
those
ask,
time
if there was
jokes.
going to be more.
Yeah. You have another one?
You want to stop there? I mean,
We know there was the two buffalo out grazing, Bill and Bob, and Bill said,
Buffalo Bill.
yeah, and Bill said, you know, it looks like, I think it's going to be cloudy all day. And Bob said, you know, I'm getting really tired of your discouraging words.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. It's a
I got
song.
it.
And the clouds are cloudy all day. Home on the range.
Oh, home on the
Yeah.
range.
You guys, your generation doesn't do that anymore.
Don't worry, we'll edit them out. It's all right.
It was big when Howdy Doody was big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the spring, summer, winter fall, remember that? That's
It takes about 3 minutes to complete the joke.
Man, it's a tough crowd, yeah. Tough
See,
crowd. Getting heckled.
I maintain the brick joke is a good joke.
In the face of all evidence, you're still gonna.
Yeah,
You're
I
good.
know. Well, Super Bowl Sunday.
Super Sunday.
Super Sunday. Is that what it is? Super Sunday.
Well, Super Bowl Sunday, either one.
The 50th Super Bowl.
The 50th.
And so we got the line on the game today. And that's, everybody know what that's a betting line. And you can vote, you can bet on the winner, you can bet on what they call the spread. You can bet on anything. You can bet on the length of time of the national anthem. You can bet on that. Whether or not it's going to go over or under so many seconds. I think it's 57 seconds or something like that.
That's actually a popular bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that draws quite a few bets. What the time is on the singing of the national anthem.
So the Super Bowl is all about winning, right? It's all about winning. And everybody likes to win. That's why people bet on it. So it's a big, big thing. So what I want to talk today about not winning but losing. All right, and the benefits of losing. Because everything is always about winning. And it's not anything new, but just kind of remind us of the benefits of losing. Having grown up in church, all my life, my dad being a minister, and me also studying Bible in college, and all the things I've done. You know, there's a way in which sometimes Christianity is approached as focusing on winning. And I'm not saying that's all bad, but really, I looked at it a few years ago, and I realized here that if you're an outsider looking in, here's this organization that focuses on winning. We won. I mean, we used to sing victory in Jesus. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying the focus is on winning. We have the winning formula, which churches call doctrine. You know, we got the winning formula. We got the winning phrases. Churches and Christians have their own way of talking. We got the winning slogans. Maybe you put on bumper stickers or whatever, you know. And books about how to win and how to win over this issue, how to win over that issue. I remember when I was a teenager, a book was out called The Christian Secret of a Happy Life. And it was about how to be happy all the time, you know, how to really go out and be happy. And nothing wrong with that, once again. But something dawned on me a few years ago, is that with all this emphasis on winning, and almost this sense of sometimes I almost get the feeling, even when I was more involved in a part of it, that in a way sometimes it was almost like growing up in a town like I did in Newark, where it was Newark and Christiana High School, and you wore your colors and you wore your bumper sticker, and it was, you know, rooting for our team. And sometimes churches can be that way or come across that way. Once again, not that everything we do is bad, but to the outside, it's like we've won. You know, we've won this thing. So come over to our side. And so there's some reason for that. There's some good reason for it, but I think there's some maybe a way of looking at it a little differently. A few years ago, I was reading the Bible again and again and again. I realized so much of the Bible is about losers. You just really look at it, it's not, and Glenn, I don't know, when you read it for the first time, if any of this dawned on you, because I know you kind of skipped over the Old Testament. It starts out with Adam and Eve blew it. They're losers. Cain and Abel. Cain was, he murdered, and Abel is dead. You know, you kind of go right down the line, and now they had some good things, but they all blew it too. Just right on down the line. You think of Jacob, one of the, Israel is named after Jacob, who was just this deceitful guy. Pulled the wool over his dad's eyes, and he goes, and he and his uncle have a tug of war for years of deceiving each other and taking advantage of each other. And that's Jacob. It's one of the heroes of the Bible, Abraham, who, the man of faith, Father Abraham, from which we get two of the great, three religions really. But he spent much of his life trying to work things out on his own and messing up. David, it wasn't, committing adultery and murder wasn't just a little tiny spot on his life. It's a huge deal. Huge deal. And then Solomon, King Solomon, the wisest man of all time, and then went through his time of making mistakes, and then hands off the kingdom. And so hands off the kingdom and the kingdom divides. Then if you read the books of Kings and Chronicles and all that, they detail all these kings, and you had a divided kingdom, so each section of the kingdom had their own king for years and years and years, almost all of whom were terrible. Almost all of them were terrible. Very few good kings, one after the other. And he did evil, and he did evil, and he did evil, Some of the prophets had their just really, really weak moments. So in a way, too, you could almost look at it and say, well, this is a story of God creating this, and it's all good. And his experiment went bad. So, and only to say that's just interesting to me, that this story is a story full of people who really messed up. Really messed up. And so I'm thinking about that, I remember a song when I was in high school, Steely Dan song, and one of the lines was, they got a name for winners in the world, I want a name when I lose. Because we live in a culture that's so much emphasis on winning and succeeding and being on top. But that's not where we live. That's not where we live. So what are these benefits? So I'm just going to throw out a few, and then maybe you guys have other more that just things that we learn um, when we lose, and that can mean a lot of things. First of all, when we lose, it sometimes can help us remember or discover what's worth holding on to, what's really worth holding on to. You know, we live sometimes thinking that we need certain things, and then sometimes we have to decide what are we going to let go, what's worth letting go. And it's good to know that. It's good to have that perspective and have that kind of self-inspection where we say, you know, I can live with a lot less than I thought I could. I like it's kind of like the story of David when he went to and check on his brothers, and the whole army was just paralyzed by this giant Goliath, you know. And so he's going to go fight. He decides he's kind of embarrassed for Israel's army that they're being held hostage by this guy. So he volunteers, just a kid, but he was not just a kid. He was, you know, he took care of sheep, and he had to fight off wild animals. You know, so he had kind of lived a life where the older brothers went out and did things, and he was just stuck behind and taking care of the sheep, which is not a job that people craved to do back in that time. It was like the low end, you know. So in a way, it was his loss. Here he is, the youngest, stuck with the dirtiest job. The brothers going off and fighting in battle. But he had learned a lot. And he'd learned maybe what he didn't really need, what he needed and what he didn't need in those long weeks and nights spent taking care of the sheep. And so they put all this armor on him and wanted him to go out and fight Goliath, and he just said, no, I can't do it. I don't need this. This is really going to hold me down. And so you know the story. He goes out with what he did have and what he had learned to use. And isn't it that way sometimes where we live a certain way, and then we go through something that maybe seems like a terrible thing, but it teaches us that maybe the baggage we were walking around with is really holding us down. You know, and it becomes a freeing thing. And I think it was for David. Paul, I referenced this last week, I think, Paul, the Apostle Paul, who had everything, you know, was part of the ruling class of Israel, a lot of money and probably prestige, probably a lot of possessions, and he ends up going out and being thrown in prison at times, being shipwrecked. And he says, I've learned how to be content with nothing. I've learned how to have stuff. I've learned how to have nothing. And so maybe when we have a loss of some kind, we learn the value of what we had, or we learn that what we had wasn't important. So that when we do have, when we're in periods of winning or periods of abundance, we have a new perspective on all those things. I got 4 of these, that's one. The second one is that when we lose at times, it brings needed discipline into our lives, or it can. It can. It doesn't always have to, but it can bring needed discipline into our lives. Bring needed structure, needed change into our lives. Sometimes it's forced on us by the situation. Sometimes it's just out of desperation that we just fall into a structure, you know, but it ends up being good for us. There's a very interesting line in the Bible that says Jesus learned obedience through his suffering. And in all my years of going to school and college Bible classes, I never really heard anybody really totally explain that. But just to throw it out there for it, Jesus himself learned obedience or discipline through suffering, through losing. You know. Third thing is, and I kind of alluded to this, but when we lose, it can be a time of real self-inspection and a time of change. A time to where we say, well, you know, this is a time when to not just reflect on my loss or my pain, but also just to reflect on myself. You know, the question that we throw out, you know, or who is the person I most want to be? Who's the person I really love being? And so those times can kind of make everything stop, and we have a little time for self-inspection. And the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, you know, and he was persecuting Christians, and then he had this experience on the road where he's blinded, and then he becomes a believer, and then he goes on later on to write most of the New Testament. He spent years in seclusion before all that happened. Years. And so, you know, I think it's kind of interesting, and his loss turned into a gain of perspective, and a gain of joy from what we read in the stories. But there was this long period of preparation, you might say, but this in-between period, it wasn't overnight, it wasn't boom, it was like, oh, okay, but I'm sure there was some time of really like, wow, big change in my life, and he decided to go with it. But sometimes those periods of time are good. And finally, when we lose, it helps us identify and see others and identify with others. You know, suddenly our eyes are opened to how other people live. And I think it's very interesting that you know, this is even talked about Jesus, that he's going to be a man of sorrows. You know, and certainly there's talk about victory over death and victory over things in the Bible, but Jesus was not broadcast as the man, the victor. You know, and I think that's what his disciples maybe were thinking. He's going to come in and we're going to win. You know, it's win, win, win. And he came in as Isaiah, years before he came, said he was going to be a man of sorrows. He's going to identify with our sorrows, identify with our weaknesses. And we see that when he came. People were not afraid to approach him. People who were hurting, people who had lost, the losers, if you want to put it, were not afraid to approach him. He was a man of sorrows. And in a sense, the story of the Bible is that he gave up. He lost his position. He lost everything to come and do what? Live among us, identify with us, be one of us. I know my mom's got this book. It's one of her favorite books, and it's kind of a coffee, well, she kept it on the coffee table. It's not a coffee table book. But it's a beautifully written book, but also largely, the person is also an artist, so it's a large book, but it's called He Was One of Us. And it's just these pictures of Jesus touching people's lives that he could identify with because of his loss. So I kind of finished with this story. Years ago I read this story, but J.C. Penney, you know, who started the Penny store, way back in the early 1900s, and it became a success. He was a winner. He's a very successful businessman, and got this penny store going, and it was booming until the stock market crash of '29, and he lost everything. He lost everything. The businesses were still there, but he lost his personal worth. He ended up spending time in a mental hospital. And so a lot of time of introspection and looking at himself and dealing with loss after being such a winner. And he came through it, but he came through it a changed person. And he didn't have as much of the control or hands-on control of running, pennies, which by then were all over, especially the West and the Northwest. But he went around from store to store and spent time with the workers. And so one story is that he was in Iowa, and he spent some time helping one of the workers learn how to fold packages, how to wrap packages and put ribbon on them without wasting those packages. That was Sam Walton, who would then go on and be quite successful. But one thing I always heard about Sam Walton is that he was just such an ordinary guy, you know, and you wonder if it was part of it by being touched by this guy who was head of all these stores all over the country and came and spent time teaching him how to wrap a package, you know. But I think that can be the effect of sometimes when we lose. So anyways, we get ready to, which, you know, or any day really, but Super Bowl Sunday, I was just thinking about, only one team wins, only one person is an MVP. Everybody else finishes the season with a loss. That's life, you know. And so what do we gain when we lose? There's so much. So that's what I have.